The frozen land of ancient Antarctica stretched wide beneath a pale sun. Snow drifted across jagged rocks and winds cut sharp through valleys. Herds of small plant-eaters searched for scraps of green hidden under frost. Silence ruled until heavy steps echoed between cliffs. A shadow emerged tall and crowned with crest shaped like a wave of bone. Cryolophosaurus moved with power, its breath steaming in the cold air. Eyes burned with hunger as it scanned the herd. The icy ground trembled beneath its stride. The predator carried the promise of swift violence, waiting only for the first mistake. The world was young and raw. Vast continents shifted slowly across the surface of the planet. Volcanoes erupted in fiery bursts and glaciers carved their marks into stone. Antarctica was not the frozen wasteland known to people today. Instead, it was a land of extremes where bitter winds swept across plains, yet forests of conifers still clung to life. The sun lingered low in the sky, casting long shadows across valleys where streams cut narrow paths through ice and rock. Here the struggle for survival never ceased. Every creature was bound to the rhythm of hunger and fear. Among these creatures walked a hunter unlike any other. It stood tall, nearly 20 feet from snout to tail, and its skull carried a strange crest rising above its eyes like a frozen wave carved from bone. This was Cryolophosaurus, the crowned lizard of the south. Its presence alone shifted the balance of the land. The smaller plant-eaters knew the shape of its shadow and the sound of its heavy stride. Even the thick hide of armored reptiles was no guarantee of safety. When the crowned hunter closed in, the landscape was treacherous. Snowstorms could arrive without warning, cloaking the world in white silence. Ice cracked underfoot and sent unwary creatures tumbling into rivers that froze solid during long nights. Food was scarce, which made every hunt more desperate and every victory more vital. For Cryolophosaurus, hunger was a constant companion, driving its every move. It roamed valleys and ridges, always searching for prey that could satisfy its vast strength. Yet this land was not ruled by predators alone. Herds of large plant-eaters moved in tight groups, watching each other for danger. Their strength came from numbers and their instinct to protect the young. Whenever a shadow fell across the snow, they pressed together and prepared to flee. Smaller feathered dinosaurs darted between trees, scavenging scraps and hiding from anything larger than themselves. Life pulsed in every corner, but it was a life forged in hardship. Cryolophosaurus thrived in these conditions because its body was built for power. Muscles rippled beneath its scaled skin. Its jaws carried teeth sharp as knives shaped for tearing flesh from bone. The crest upon its head did not weaken it, but gave it an identity, a crown, that marked its dominance in the frozen south. With every step it declared ownership of its world, and with every hunt it proved its right to survive. One early morning the horizon glowed faintly with cold light. Breath hung in the air like smoke. Cryolophosaurus moved down a slope where ice cracked under its weight. Ahead, a cluster of prosauropods scraped at the snow, desperate to uncover shoots of buried plants. Their long necks swayed as they pulled at the hard ground. They did not yet sense the danger watching from the rise above them. The predator lowered its head and studied the herd with calm patience. It did not waste energy in reckless pursuit. Timing was everything in this frozen land. The wind shifted. A faint sound carried across the valley, and one of the prosauropods lifted its head. Its dark eyes blinked as it stared into the distance. The rest of the herd continued their search for food, unaware of the hunter closing in. Cryolophosaurus crouched low, blending with the broken rocks scattered along the slope. Its muscles tensed, ready to unleash speed and violence. But this was not a land where hunts always succeeded. Snow crunched beneath its claws, and the sharp sound startled a young prosauropod. The alarm cry pierced the silence, and the herd bolted as one. Tails lashed the air, and heavy bodies churned through snow as they fled toward the forest edge. Cryolophosaurus burst forward with explosive speed, its powerful legs driving across the slope. The chase thundered through the valley, echoing between the cliffs. For long minutes predator and prey clashed in a test of endurance. Cryolophosaurus singled out the young straggler that lagged behind. Its jaws snapped inches from the creature's tail. The prosauropod twisted and leapt aside, barely escaping the strike. Snow sprayed in all directions as both animals struggled for survival. At last the herd reached the cover of tall conifers where narrow paths and fallen branches slowed the larger hunter. Cryolophosaurus growled in frustration, its breath clouding the air before turning away. Hunger remained unsatisfied, yet the fire of pursuit burned brighter within it. These failed hunts were part of the rhythm of survival. Success came not from impatience, but from persistence. Cryolophosaurus understood that every attempt carried lessons written in muscle and memory. Each mistake sharpened its instincts, and each escape hardened its resolve. The crown hunter would stalk again, and next time the land itself would not save its prey. The frozen valleys of Antarctica belonged to no single creature. They shifted daily between moments of silence and sudden eruptions of violence. Carnivores circled, always searching. Herbivores clung to life, in herds their unity, the only shield against predators. The land offered little mercy and no second chances. Yet in this cycle, Cryolophosaurus was a figure of dominance. Its crest stood tall against the pale horizon, a symbol of both power and mystery. No other predator could match its presence. Even the scavengers that followed in its wake waited with cautious reverence. To them, it was more than a hunter. It was a force woven into the very breath of the land. Thus began the story of Cryolophosaurus, the crowned lizard that ruled the icy south. It was not a tale of easy triumphs, but of endless struggle of prey fleeing across frozen plains and predator chasing through storms. It was a story shaped by hunger, by instinct, and by the cold silence of a land that tested every creature without pause. The days stretched long beneath the pale sun. In the frozen wilderness of ancient Antarctica, every dawn began with a quiet stillness, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Frost clung to tree trunks and glistened on every stone. Yet beneath that stillness life stirred and moved. Herds searched for food in tight groups. Scavengers lingered near the edges of cliffs, hoping for scraps. And among them moved the crowned predator that carried hunger like a fire in its chest. Cryolophosaurus strode across the valley floor, leaving deep tracks in the snow. Its eyes scanned the horizon with patience and calculation. The last hunt had ended in failure, yet failure did not weaken it. Failure was part of the rhythm of survival. Already its body had recovered its muscles ready, its senses sharp. The crest upon its head gleamed faintly in the weak light, making a figure that could not be mistaken for any other. The frozen land was not a paradise. Food was scarce and prey grew thin. Herbivores scraped bark from trees and dug at frozen soil to uncover brittle shoots. This scarcity made every hunt more desperate. Cryolophosaurus could not afford long stretches without meat. Each day brought new urgency. Each step across the snow was a search for the chance to strike. One afternoon, the predator found a trail of tracks leading through a narrow pass between cliffs. The scent was faint but enough to stir the hunter's interest. It lowered its head and followed the trail with slow, steady steps. The air carried the sharp tang of plant eaters. The tracks belonged to a herd of prosauropods. Their broad feet had pressed deep into the snow, leaving a clear path that wound into the valley beyond. The hunt was not simple. The pass narrowed into twisting ridges where ice hung from the rocks. One slip could send a creature tumbling to its death. Cryolophosaurus moved carefully, each step measured each claw gripping stone and snow. Its weight pressed against the frozen path, yet its balance kept it steady. The wind whistled through the cliffs, carrying distant echoes. Somewhere ahead, prey was moving, unaware of the danger stalking them. The valley opened suddenly into a wide basin. Here the herd grazed in uneasy silence. Long necks swayed as the prosauropods searched beneath snow for plants. Their tails swept the ground in slow arcs. They huddled close, pressing against one another for warmth and protection. Cryolophosaurus paused at the edge of the ridge and studied them. Its breath steamed in the cold air as it calculated distance and speed. The crowned predator did not rush. It watched and waited. The prosauropods had strength in numbers, but they also had weakness in their young. One calf wandered slightly apart from the group, searching near a frozen stream. Its steps were uncertain, and its neck bent low. Instinct tightened in Cryolophosaurus like a coiled spring. That calf would be the target. The hunt began with silence. Cryolophosaurus descended the ridge, its body pressed low against the rocks. Snow clung to its scales as it crept closer. Each movement was careful, each stride placed with precision. The herd remained unaware, still focused on scraping food from the frozen ground. The calf lifted its head and blinked at the still world around it. For a heartbeat, the land seemed frozen in time. Then the predator struck. With explosive power, Cryolophosaurus lunged from the cover of rocks. Snow erupted beneath its claws. The herd bellowed in alarm and stampeded toward the far side of the basin. The calf cried out in panic as the crown hunter closed the distance with terrifying speed. Its muscles drove it forward, its jaws wide and ready to clamp down. But survival was never simple. The adults of the herd turned back, forming a living wall. Massive tails lashed the air, forcing the predator to veer aside. Cryolophosaurus roared a thunderous sound that echoed through the cliffs. The herd did not scatter blindly. They clustered around the calf, protecting it with their bulk. The hunt had turned into a standoff predator against the will of the herd. Cryolophosaurus circled, snapping its jaws and searching for an opening. Each attempt to rush forward was met with a tail strike or a defensive lunge. Snow churned beneath pounding feet, the air filled with cries of fear and defiance. The predator lashed its tail and growled frustration, vibrating through its chest. Hunger gnawed at it more fiercely than ever. Yet patience was a weapon too. The standoff stretched long. The herd slowly retreated step by step, keeping their formation tight. Cryolophosaurus advanced a little, then pulled back, its yellow eyes fixed on the calf in the center. The prey slipped away into the forest shadows, at last leaving only churned snow and fading tracks behind. The predator roared once more, a cry of rage and hunger that rolled across the frozen basin. Another hunt had failed. Failure meant more than an empty belly. It meant danger. A starving predator grew weaker, and every rival in the land waited for weakness. Cryolophosaurus could not afford to waste strength without reward. Yet in the frozen land, opportunities were rare. It pressed on across valleys and ridges, searching for another chance. Days passed. Hunger deepened. The predator's steps grew heavier, though its spirit did not falter. Each sunrise carried the same urgency, the same hunger, and at last fortune shifted. On the far side of a frozen river lay a clearing where herds did not gather. Instead, smaller creatures darted between stunted trees. Their Cryolophosaurus spotted a different kind of prey. A lone ornithischian, separated from its group, limped along the edge of the clearing. Its flank carried scars from a recent attack, and its gait was slow. The crowned predator felt the fire of opportunity ignite once more. The hunt was swift. No herd rose to defend this lone creature. Cryolophosaurus burst from the tree line in a blur of muscle and scale. The wounded animal tried to run, but its legs faltered. Snow sprayed as it stumbled. In moments, the predator's jaws closed around its body. Flesh tore. Bones cracked. The hunt ended in brutal victory. Cryolophosaurus fed with savage relief, tearing chunks of meat and swallowing them whole. The taste of blood and the warmth of flesh filled the emptiness inside. Strength surged through its body once more. The frozen land was merciless, yet it had yielded its prize at last. The crowned hunter lifted its head, blood steaming against the cold air. Its eyes scanned the horizon, always wary of scavengers that might be drawn to the kill. Already small feathered creatures crept from the trees, their eyes glinting with hunger. Cryolophosaurus bared its teeth and roared. The scavengers scattered into the snow. Though hunger was sated for now, the cycle would never end. The frozen land demanded constant struggle. Every hunt was followed by another. Every victory was temporary. And within the icy valleys, other threats stirred predators that watched from afar, waiting for their chance to challenge the crowned hunter. Cryolophosaurus did not fear them. It stood tall against the pale sky, its crest gleaming like a crown of bone. This was its land. This was its throne. And as long as it drew breath, it would fight to hold its place against every rival and every storm that the frozen South could bring. The frozen South lay under a dim sky where the pale sun offered little warmth. The wind screamed through valleys, scattering snow into spirals. Trees groaned as their branches bent against the icy gusts. It was a harsh land, even for the strongest. Yet within that storm of cold, survival burned like fire. Cryolophosaurus, the crowned predator, moved across the plain, its muscles taut, its crest gleaming faintly against the horizon. Hunger had been eased days before, but now a new struggle called. The predator was not alone in its claim to the land. Another hunter stalked the same valleys of rival, nearly as large, with jaws armed in teeth and eyes sharpened by desperation. Cryolophosaurus had smelled it before, carried faint on the wind the scent of another carnivore. Now that rival stepped boldly into the open across the frozen river. It was a massive theropod with scars that marked its height and strength that radiated from every stride. The two predators locked eyes across the snow. The land grew silent, as if even the wind paused to witness the coming storm. This was not a chase of herd and calf, nor a test of patience against prey. This was predator against predator, a battle for dominance over the frozen throne. Cryolophosaurus lowered its head to crest, catching the light like a crown of ice. The rival growled a deep sound that rumbled across the valley. Slowly they circled each other, their claws cutting tracks into the snow. Every step measured, every breath heavy with tension. Neither could back away. The land had little room for two hunters of such power. The clash came sudden and violent. Cryolophosaurus lunged first, jaws snapping with explosive force. The rival twisted aside, but claws raked across its flank, leaving trails of blood steaming in the cold air. With a roar, it retaliated, slamming its bulk against the crown predator. Snow erupted beneath their weight as bodies crashed together. Teeth met scales. The sound of impact echoed between cliffs like thunder. They tore at each other with primal fury. Cryolophosaurus clamped its jaws on the rival's shoulder, shaking with brutal power. The other predator bellowed and thrashed, slamming its tail against the crowned hunter's side. Pain rippled through muscle and bone, yet the grip held strong until at last the rival twisted free, tearing flesh in the process. Blood streaked the snow. Both predators circled, once more their breaths heavy, their eyes blazing. This was not a brief struggle. It was a war that would end only with victory or death. The rival lunged low, aiming for the leg of Cryolophosaurus. If crippled, the crown predator would fall forever. But instinct honed by endless hunts guided its movements. Cryolophosaurus leapt back and swung its head sideways, the crest flashing past like a blade. Its jaws snapped down onto the rival's, neck scraping close to the vein. The rival roared and slammed forward, knocking both beasts to the ground. They rolled through the snow in a frenzy of teeth and claws. The earth shook under their weight. Bones creaked. Muscles strained. Each roar split the air like lightning. Smaller creatures fled in terror, their cries lost in the chaos of the battle. The frozen land itself seemed to tremble as two kings fought for supremacy. Cryolophosaurus rose first, towering above the rival. Its body bled from deep wounds, yet its spirit blazed hotter than ever. With a guttural cry, it lunged again, jaws clamping around the rival's arm. The sound of bone cracking rang sharp against the frozen silence. The rival screamed, thrashing and striking with its free claw, but the crowned predator refused to release its hold. The struggle became a storm of violence. Snow churned beneath claws. Blood splattered the ground in dark rivers. Cryolophosaurus felt pain searing through its own body, but it drove forward with relentless determination. Each movement carried the weight of survival, not just for this moment, but for every day that would follow. To lose here was to vanish forever from a frozen land. At last the rival faltered. Its injured arm dragged against the snow. Its breaths came ragged, shallow, and desperate. Cryolophosaurus saw weakness and pressed the attack. With terrifying speed, it slammed its bulk against the rival, forcing it onto its side. Jaws clamped around the neck. Once more this time, deeper, sharper, unyielding. The rival thrashed, weakly, snow spraying in frantic bursts, but its strength drained quickly under the crushing bite. The valley rang with a final roar of defiance before silence fell. The rival's body slumped heavy and motionless. The snow beneath them turned red. Cryolophosaurus stood over the fallen predator, its chest heaving with exhaustion, its crest high against the dim sky. Pain seared through its wounds, yet triumph thundered in its heart. The frozen land had chosen its ruler. Cryolophosaurus lifted its head and roared a sound that rolled across cliffs and forests. It was a cry of dominance, a survival of victory, earned through blood. Every creature within hearing froze in recognition of the crown hunter's supremacy. The battle had left scars that would mark its body for life. Yet scars were more than reminders of pain. They were symbols of strength, proof of survival, proof that the crown predator had faced death and conquered it. In this land of ice and silence, Cryolophosaurus remained unbroken, the rightful lord of the South. The valley lay quiet once more. Snow drifted across the ground, covering the stains of battle, though the memory of violence lingered in every claw mark and broken branch. Cryolophosaurus stood alone above the body of its fallen rival. Its breath rose in heavy clouds, each exhale shaking with exhaustion. Wounds covered its sides, red trails marking its journey through the struggle. Yet in its stance there was no weakness. The crowned hunter remained standing tall, the victor of a war that would decide the fate of the frozen land. For a long time it did not move. The weight of battle pressed upon his body, yet the fire of triumph burned deep. Around the edges of the clearing, smaller creatures emerged from hiding. Feathered scavengers crept forward, their eyes fixed on the massive carcass of the fallen predator. Cryolophosaurus turned its head and bared its teeth. The scavengers shrieked and scattered. This was not yet theirs. The kill belonged to the crowned one who had spilled the blood. Still, Cryolophosaurus did not feed immediately. The rival had not been prey but challenger. To consume its flesh felt different than tearing into a herd animal. This was victory marked not by hunger, but by dominance. The crowned hunter turned its gaze across the valley, where shadows stretched long across the snow. The land was wide, but not wide enough for two predators of such power. Now one remained. Pain throbbed through its body with each step as it moved from the battlefield. Blood dripped onto the snow, leaving a trail that steamed in the cold air. Yet the predator did not falter. Every scar carried a story of survival. Each wound was proof that it had fought and endured. It walked not in weakness, but in power. The land itself seemed to acknowledge its claim as silence spread in its wake. The days that followed tested its strength. Hunting with fresh wounds was difficult. Each movement sent sharp aches through muscle and bone. Still, hunger did not wait. Cryolophosaurus returned to frozen rivers and forest edges, searching for prey. Herds moved cautiously, keeping close together, whenever they sensed a predator's approach. Yet fear worked as well as speed. When the crowned hunter appeared, the land shifted in panic, and even the strongest prey fled. It did not always succeed in bringing down a victim, but its presence alone was enough to shape the rhythm of the land. One morning it tracked a herd of prosauropods across a wide plain. The sun rose weak and pale, barely touching the horizon. The herd scraped at patches of ground where plants still clung beneath the frost. Cryolophosaurus approached slowly, its movements measured. Pain from its wounds lingered, yet instinct demanded action. This time the herd broke apart before the predator even lunged. Their cries filled the air as they fled into the forest, leaving behind a straggler too weak to keep pace. The crowned hunter surged forward despite the ache in its muscles and brought the creature down. The kill restored its strength. Flesh and blood renewed its body, allowing wounds to knit slowly. The scars would never fade, but the pain dulled with each passing day. The land continued to challenge it with storms that buried valleys in snow and rivers that froze so deep even claws could not break through. Yet Cryolophosaurus endured. Every sunrise found alive, still moving, still hunting, still claiming its throne in the frozen south. Over time, the legend of the crowned predator grew among the herds. The sight of the crest gleaming above the snow struck terror even before its roar echoed through the cliffs. Smaller carnivores learned to keep their distance. They scavenged only when Cryolophosaurus had taken what it desired. The balance of the land bent around it as though the frozen wilderness itself had crowned its ruler. But dominance was never eternal. The land remained harsh and unforgiving. Storms came without warning, burying tracks and prey alike. Nights stretched long, filled with bitter cold that gnawed at flesh and bone. Yet even in these trials, Cryolophosaurus adapted. It found shelter within caves carved by rivers long frozen. It endured the winds that swept across ridges. It learned the patterns of prey, the times they gathered at streams, the paths they took when crossing valleys. Knowledge became as vital as strength. Still, the memory of the battle with the rival lingered. Sometimes Cryolophosaurus would lift its head and stare across the snow, imagining the roar that once challenged its own. The scars on its side pulsed faint reminders of that day. Yet those reminders did not weaken it. They hardened it. Each scar was a mark of earned supremacy. The cycle of life continued. Herds birthed young, and those young became the targets of endless hunts. Scavengers trailed every predator, hoping for scraps. The land remained merciless yet balanced, and at the heart of that balance moved the crowned hunter. Every roar declared its rule. Every hunt reinforced its dominance. Seasons shifted. The cold deepened and forests thinned under the weight of snow. Yet Cryolophosaurus did not falter. Hunger still drove it. Survival still shaped its path. In every breath, in every step, in every scar, the predator lived as a symbol of power in the frozen south. The frozen land stretched wide beneath the sky, painted with pale light. Snow swept across the plains, carried by endless winds. The scars of battle had long faded into memory, yet the crowned predator still walked across the valleys. Cryolophosaurus carried every mark of its survival with pride. Each step pressed deep into the ice as a reminder that even in the harshest world strength endured. Herds still gathered in tight clusters, watching the horizon with wary eyes. They knew the shadow of the crest even from a great distance. Fear rippled through them whenever the crowned hunter appeared. They fled before the first roar sounded, because the land had already taught them the cost of hesitation. To live beneath the rule of Cryolophosaurus was to live in constant awareness of its power. Yet survival was not only about hunger or fear. The predator itself was part of the balance. By taking the weak, it allowed the strong to thrive. By driving herds across the plains, it shaped the rhythm of their movement. The frozen land was alive with this cycle, and Cryolophosaurus was its enforcer, its crowned guardian bound by instinct and need. As seasons shifted, storms grew harsher, and the nights stretched longer. Still the predator endured. It sought shelter when the wind screamed through valleys. It pressed on through snow that reached its chest. Each day was a test, and each day was passed. The crowned one lived not because the land was merciful, but because it refused to yield. One evening the sun sank low, leaving the sky painted in streaks of silver and violet. Cryolophosaurus stood upon a ridge, its silhouette sharp against the horizon. The cold air carried its roar across the valleys, rolling like thunder through the frozen world. Every creature paused to listen. It was a sound of power, survival, or ruler who had claimed its place in the heart of ice. The land of Antarctica would change over millions of years. Ice would deepen, forests would vanish, and creatures would rise and fall. But in the memory of that ancient time, one name remained etched into the frozen stone. Cryolophosaurus, the crowned lizard, the king of the cold.